Elsinore, the site of historical battles and theatrical tumult. Here, Hamlet famously agonised over a decision. So while in the neighbourhood, I thought it's a perfect place for me to ask a burning question.
To burn or not to burn, that is the question. Whether it is wiser in the earth to bury the junk and plastics of outrageous convenience, or to take energy from a sea of trouble, some waste, and by burning, end them. Sorry, Shakespeare.
I've come to Sweden, and while I'm enjoying this beautiful city of islands, it's a much less picturesque part of this country of 10 million that I've come to see. Ever since I became known for going through everyone's bins, people have come up to me and told me we should copy what Sweden does with its waste. They burn a lot of it and turn it into energy.
Thank you.
This so-called waste-to-energy process is becoming the new go-to solution in Australia. So I've come here to find out if this would be a good fix for our garbage crisis. Our search starts at 5 a.m. on the Baltic Sea.
Sweden has become known as the darling of the waste world. And according to the government, they recycle 99% of their waste. And this boat here is part of the story. They're so successful with their waste, and now they're importing it from other countries. The Swee freighter left from England 3 days ago, and on board 3,000 tonnes of rubbish on its way to Västerås in Sweden, about to be burnt.
Sweden is turning other countries' trash into cash. The bales in this boat will earn them around $200,000. And all up, Sweden makes around $100 million a year from this trade. They mix the imports with local rubbish, and it's incinerated in 34 plants dotted around the country. They say this is better than Australia's approach of burying waste in landfill. The government here even calls it recycling. But I'm not so sure. So I've come to this plant at Västerås to see for myself.
Oh, wow. Look at this. That is a bit frightening.
This is supposed to be the stuff that's left over in the garbage after homes and businesses have taken out all the recycling.
What do you count this as, a renewable or recyclable?
Well, recyclable, because this is recycling.
This is right.
We're turning it into energy, so we see it as a kind of recycling.
For me, recycling is taking something and turning it back into a product that can keep going.
Yeah, but we turn it into energy. We turn it into energy, so that's the way we look at it.
That's not how I'd look at it. But the plant does try to remove some leftover recyclables.
We can take out metals, parts of aluminum, glass, sand, smaller rocks, and etc.
In what's left, there's a lot of paper, wood, and also plastic.
The best thing would be, of course, to recycle the plastic.
Yeah.
But once it has entered the waste, well, once the plastic is waste, this is one good way of taking care of it.
Wow. This is where the actual action happens, eh? Wow, so this is the boiler. How hot is it?
900 degrees Celsius within the boiler.
And this is what it's all about. The waste is burnt, and it generates both electricity and hot water for heating the town in winter.
So how much waste can this burn in an hour?
60 tons an hour.
60 tons of waste an hour.
Yes.
But what's left over? In Australia, arguments against burning waste have centred on the question of toxic emissions.
So can you guarantee that there's not carcinogens and that kind of thing? Or what are you actually pumping out there?
There are chemicals in it, of course, but they are according to the regulations that we have to follow.
So does the Swedish government monitor what comes out of there?
Oh yes, they do, and we have the highest demands in all Sweden regarding what comes out of the chimney.
How does it take everything out? What happens to then, if it takes out all of these toxins, what does it do with it?
Well, a lot of the toxins are taken out in the burning process, so they are destroyed in the high temperature. It's about 900 degrees Celsius.
So the actual heat of that boiler makes a difference to getting rid of the emission?
Yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah.
But also then we wash the fumes.
You wash the fumes?
We wash the fumes.
Keeping emissions clean does not come cheap. This plant cost $500 million to build and $35 million a year to run. But it has some nice little earners too. It's not just paid to take rubbish. The electricity is worth $10 million a year. Central heating, though, is the big one. With 900 kilometres of underground piping to nearly all of the city's homes, they rake in $65 million a year. But while the Swedes have found a way to make money from garbage, there are a few things that are still bugging me. I was really surprised at how much plastic there was in the mix at the waste-to-energy plant. How does this fit with Sweden's green energy story?
Sweden banned landfill many years ago, so if I don't finish my lunch, it's not going to end up going into landfill and turning into methane gas, which of course is a greenhouse gas. But the big question I have, what happens to those things like these plastic packaging that does end up being thrown away? What's the effect if you're burning plastic?
Did you fly over the archipelago as well?
To find out, I'm meeting with Professor Göran Finnveden, who studied waste-to-energy for many years.
What is the effect in terms of emissions of burning plastics?
Well, you get CO2 emissions, you get carbon dioxide emissions, like if you incinerate oil.
I can't believe I'm saying this because I think we come from Australia where most things are buried, and I hate the idea of landfill. But is it sometimes worse to be burning plastics than actually burying them?
Yes, it can be, at least in the short term, because if you incinerate plastics, you get the carbon dioxide emissions immediately, whereas if you bury them, it will take a long time before they degrade. But there can be other problems with landfill. It takes up space. You can have leachate coming out of toxic chemicals, etc.
To what extent is recycling rather than burning beneficial?
Recycling is almost always, there can be exceptions, but almost always more beneficial, both from an energy perspective and from the perspective of emissions.
Those that oppose waste-to-energy also say it gives an easy out for waste and discourages recycling. But Sweden sees itself as a leader in the recycling world. So I'm keen to see how the locals are keeping these resources away from the furnaces.
Hello,
Hi.
I'm Craig. How are you?
I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you.
Sarah, how are you?
Hello,
Hello.
my name is Vilda.
Good to meet you, Vilda. How are you
Well,
going?
come on in and I'll show you the kitchen.
Thank you.
I've arranged to meet Sarah Jarnhead and her family, who have been kind enough to let me see what they do with their garbage.
So this is where we keep the dry.
Oh, this is recycling.
Oh yeah, this is where the magic happens. I get plastic. We get the plastic here.
So that's any kind of plastic you put in there?
Yeah, the dry plastic.
They go to a lot of trouble to sort waste into different categories here.
And then we have here we put glass and batteries and cans.
And they have a bottle refund scheme too.
A little bit of money on
yeah.
this one. So this is good for the kids.
I see you get the kids to do that?
Yeah. So then they get the money for that, and they can buy an ice cream.
Vilda and her brother get the message at home and also at school. Recycling is good and everyone has to do it.
Hello. Hey.
Hey guys.
Hello. Craig, how are you?
Richard, I'm fine.
Richard, how are you? Wow.
Vad fotbollen då?
It's just like Australia. Everything's put in plastic now.
This is starting to feel a bit more like home. Sweden seems to have the same over-packaging problems I looked at in Australia.
That is the good bananas, so they really have the bad bananas without the plastic, but this expensive one they have in plastic, for no reason.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is different. Their food waste is collected separately and turned into a fuel for buses and cars.
This is the other bin. Okay. So there's not much in there.
No.
What's left, and it isn't much, is destined to be burnt. But there's a neat incentive to keep that down to a minimum too.
The sensor in the under below that sounds when you empty.
Yeah, so it goes blip, blip, this, and then they send the bill to
So
us.
if you put your bin out less,
Yeah.
you pay less as well.
Yeah.
That's great.
Like most Swedes, they don't mind the idea of burning waste to generate energy.
I mean, it's better than burying it, I think. Because burying it, I think, is quite crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah, I
At
think
least you get something out.
Yeah, I think it's good because they heat up the houses and I think.
Do you think that those of us that are burying it, we're crazy?
You're crazy.
We're
right?
crazy, apparently.
Crazy nation.
All right.
But the recycling isn't done yet.
Can you help us, Mario?
We have to take it to the local collection bins.
So how long is this worth? About a month or more than a month?
Yeah, maybe a month.
Month or so?
Yeah, I would say so. Kom gubben. Ska du svara? Hej då.
Bye.
The bins are only a few minutes away, and we're not the only ones doing our duty.
So how often do you come down to recycle your stuff?
At least once a day.
Once a day?
Yeah,
Yeah?
because everything is in plastic today, and
Yeah.
I think it's just stupid. I don't know if it's recycling or they just burn it.
Well, it's interesting. So you actually bring it down here, but you don't know if they actually recycle it.
Yeah, but I do. I think I do right, but I don't know what happens in the end.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting you say that. Yeah, we want to know that too. But it's
Yeah, you find out,
We'll find out. We'll tell you. Yeah.
and you tell me.
Yeah, we'll tell you. Well, Richard and Sarah and so many other Swedes seem to be really conscientious about their sorting and their recycling. And it's great to see. I mean, one woman turned up here today on a bicycle to do it. But it's a lot more effort. I mean, it's not just picked up at your curbside. So the thing I really want to know is this leading to higher rates of recycling? Because if it's not, it's leading to higher rates of recyclables being burnt.
In Sweden, the producers that make the packaging are responsible for its recycling. The rates for glass and paper are sky high. But for plastics, the thing I'm most concerned about, I've heard there are some real problems. So I'm on my way to visit Sweden's biggest plastics recycler. They haven't been returning our calls. For this long journey south, I've, perhaps unwisely, chosen a tiny blue electric car. While I like the idea that my car is partly fueled by waste, that doesn't stop me fearing I'm going to run out of charge well before my destination.
I've got range anxiety and I don't know how to charge a car. I think I have to be some kind of registered user or something. I hope I don't have to eat McDonald's to get my car charged. Hi, do you speak English? Oh, thank you, that's great. I've never charged an electric car before. I'm at a Fortum charge station at a McDonald's. How do I pay for it and get it to charge? Yeah. Yeah, I've done that. Okay, and yeah, it's working. It's charging, thank you. Thank you very much for your help. Now what do I do?
After 300 meters, turn right.
With full charge and indigestion, we finally arrive at the plastics recycling company called Sverek.
Okay, so it's just up here.
Definitely found our plastics recycling place. There's absolute mounds of it here. Now, Sverek are meant to recycle 80% of this, but an audit was done a couple of years ago and found out they were recycling less than 40%. And the rest of it was being incinerated. Let's see if things have changed.
Hello, how are you? I'm wondering if we could speak to Leif Carlson. My name's Craig Rucastle. I'm coming from Foreign Correspondent.
Though very polite, Sverek isn't keen to talk.
Well, sadly, it looks like no one's willing to talk to us about how recycling is done here. Hello, how are you?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you turn off the camera?
Turn off the camera? Yeah, sure.
What are you doing?
We're keen to talk to Leif Carlson, but he's not here.
No.
And so we're just saying...
We haven't given you any permission to...
It's okay, it's just...
to film.
Well, that didn't get us very far, so I'm heading further up the chain of command. This is FTI. They're the industry group that organises most of the packaging recycling in Sweden and contracts Sverek. Surely they know how much plastic is recycled and how much is burned.
When Swedish people are putting all this plastic into recycle, and then, for instance, Sverek was only recycling about 38% of it and the rest was being incinerated, that's nowhere near enough recycling, is it?
Firstly, they broke our contract, and that's not okay, of course, and there was a very, very harsh discussion between us, and we were not very happy with that.
How much plastic packaging is meant to be recycled?
The government says it should be 30%, and we are up on 47 in Sweden.
But it turns out those figures aren't what's been recycled, only what's being collected.
Does that have to be recycled, or is there only a percentage of that has to be recycled?
What's sent to be sorting.
To be sorted.
Sorted for recycling. And
Okay.
it doesn't state how much that need to be recycled, though.
So what proportion, then, of the plastic packaging you get
I don't
do
have
you
that.
burn?
I don't
Not
have
too
that.
Sure.
While FTI are keen to promote their plastic collection rates, the figures that really matter are those that were reported to the government, which show that less than a third was being recycled and the rest, 70%, was burnt. And when you look at Sweden's total plastic usage, and not just packaging, it's worse. A recent report found that a whopping 84% is ending up at the incinerators. None of this is making much of a stir in Sweden. In fact, waste to energy isn't really an issue here. But across the other side of this famous bridge, there is a storm brewing in the rest of Europe. I'm meeting zero waste campaigner Jean-Marc Simon in Copenhagen, in the shadow of a controversial new waste to energy plant surrounded by apartments. To quell local opposition to this $860 million plant, the designers even included an artificial ski slope on its roof. At a state-of-the-art plant like this, Jean-Marc's concerns aren't so much about toxic pollutants, but the burning of resources.
It's a huge investment, and we have to think, like, where do we want to put the money? into preserving resources or into destroying resources. This is a very efficient machine to destroy resources. And I would say like probably it will capture most of the pollutants, but it's still a machine to destroy resources. What we have proven is that for a lot less money, you can preserve resources, you can like invest in local jobs and like keep the money in the community.
The EU seems to be taking a similar view, bringing in new laws to divert more waste into recycling. Rates right across Europe will have to rise from the current 50% up to 65% by 2035. And the materials will have to be genuinely recycled. Collection figures won't do anymore.
So it is clear that in the future we're going to see incinerators closing down in Europe because they're going to have less and less waste to burn, and recycling is going to go up.
There are other countries that have gone the other way, have kind of invested in increasing the recycling rather than waste to energy, for instance.
Yeah, we have examples in Europe where we are seeing cities actually being a lot more advanced than Copenhagen, with a lot less investment, get a lot further. Like, for example, Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia, 500,000 people, they don't have an incinerator. They are recycling in the order of 65%, which is like more than twice as much as Copenhagen, with a lot less investment, and they're recycling a lot more.
Heading back to Sweden, I wonder if I should have visited a country that's focused on recycling instead. Probably a bit late to ask for a side trip to Slovenia. For Australia, it's a question of where we invest our money. Waste to energy is an expensive option. And one thing has been troubling me about how suitable the Swedish model is for Australia. Every plant I visit talks more about heating than electricity. So I've got one final question, and I've found the person that can answer it.
In Australia, we don't have the heating capacity. We don't have central heating, district heating, or even district cooling or anything like that. Does that mean it's less efficient for Australia to invest in waste to energy, for instance?
Absolutely, that is the case. Unfortunately, if you only use the electricity, of course, the energy efficiency in the plant will be much lower than what you can find in Sweden and in other parts of the world where you also have district heating. So that will make the whole calculation less efficient. But still you have to consider what's the alternative.
It's becoming very clear that incineration is not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Charging a car at a waste-to-energy plant, it kind of feels like, oh, I'm burning trash to make this car move. But the reality is a bit more complex than that. Here in Sweden, it's summer now, and most of the furnaces have been turned off here. And that's because nearly 90% of the energy from waste-to-energy in Sweden is used for heating. So what does that mean for Australia? Are we going to put in cooling systems? Which can happen, but it requires us to dig up all the streets in our cities and put complex sets of pipes, taking the cooling to all the houses. I don't know if we're the kind of country that's going to do that kind of thing. I mean, we'd probably end up with something like cooling to the node.
None of this bothers the Swedes as they head for their popular midsummer festival. Sarah, Richard and the kids have joined the throng to dance like frogs and frolic around the maypole.
I always thought it was a cross, but then I learned that somebody told me that it's actually an old tradition from the Vikings that we cherish fertility. And so actually it's not a cross, it's a huge stick that we dance around and celebrate fertility. And but I'm not sure that it's true, but that's what everybody says. So, and I love the idea of it. I think it's beautiful because this is when everything starts growing, and so yeah, it's amazing. It's a crazy Swedish tradition that we do.
This is the height of summer. It's a time for schnapps and songs before they head into the long, bitter winter, where during 18-hour nights with sub-zero temperatures, they'll be warmed by burning the nation's waste. Not far from the maypole and the dancing, Stockholm's Högdalen waste-to-energy plant chuffs away, sitting side by side with a recycling yard. Here it seems like the perfect place to return to that burning question.
The more I've travelled around Sweden, the more I've realised they're very much interconnected. Waste to energy is not just a simple solution to our waste problems. If you don't sort out your recycling, then basically you're going to be burning a lot of plastic, which is just a low-grade oil. At best, well-done waste to energy can be a step up from landfill, but it's still very much at the bottom of the scale, and you've got to invest big time into recycling and avoiding waste in the first place.